My wife cheated on me with the doctor when I was fighting for my life with cancer. I'll never forget the day I first realized something was wrong. It was a small thing, barely noticeable at first, a change in her laugh, a look that lingered too long. But, on the other hand, how could I have foreseen it? My name is David Miller. I'm 42 years old, a father of 2, and thanks to a cruel twist of fate, a cancer patient. Stage 2 pancreatic cancer, if you want to know the grim details. And until recently, I thought I had everything I needed: a beautiful wife, Jessica, 2 wonderful children, and a stubborn will to beat this damn disease. Jessica was a stunning blonde, sharp as a whip and as charming as a coral in the ocean. People would light up when she walked into a room. When she smiled, you felt like the only person in the world. But Jessica also knew how to get what she wanted, no matter the price. I met Dr. Lucas Carter during one of my endless rounds of chemotherapy. He was young, about 30 years old. I would say good-looking in the sense that he had just graduated from medical school. Jessica seemed to hit it off with him right away, laughing at his jokes and asking him about his life outside the hospital. At the time, I chalked it up to her friendliness. She got along well with people, she always did. Weeks turned into months, and Jessica began to take on more hospital rounds. "You need to rest," she would say, running her fingers through my hair. "Let me handle this." At first, I was grateful. The chemotherapy was draining me of all my strength, and I hated dragging the kids along. But then the little things started piling up. Jessica's phone was constantly ringing, and she would get sly when I asked who it was. Her visits to the hospital became longer and longer, sometimes lasting into the evening. "Lucas had a long day," she would explain when I asked why she was late. "We were just talking." Talking? Yes, exactly. One evening I came across a message on her phone. It wasn't flashy, just a simple, "Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow," from Lucas. But there was something about it that made my stomach turn. I didn't talk about it. Not yet. Maybe I didn't want to know. The cracks in our marriage had been small at first, almost invisible. But Jessica had always been good at hiding things. Only much later did I realize how far she was willing to go. At the time, I was too busy fighting cancer to fight her, too exhausted to connect the dots. But deep down, I think I already knew. And this is where the story begins. If you've ever been caught off guard, you know how it feels. It's like standing in the ocean when a wave you didn't see coming hits you on the back. That's what happened to Jessica and Lucas. Looking back, all the signs were there, but when you're in the thick of it, you can't see the forest for the trees. One Friday, Jessica came home later than usual. She had the kids with her, so at first I didn't pay much attention. But as I was helping her unpack the groceries, I noticed something. Her hair was a little disheveled and the lipstick on her lips looked fresh, too fresh for someone who had just been to the store. "You're late," I said casually, feeling the ground. She lit me up with a dazzling smile that could sell ice to an Eskimo. "The traffic was terrible," she said, passing me to put the milk in the fridge. "And Joey wanted to stop for ice cream. You know how he can be." Joey was our 7-year-old son, a sweet boy who loved chocolate ice cream. The excuse sounded plausible enough, but there was something in her tone a little too fast, a little too rehearsed. I let it slide. For now. Over the next few weeks, Jessica's behavior became increasingly difficult to ignore. She started dressing up more for her hospital visits: tight dresses, high heels, perfume she hadn't worn in years. When I teased her about it, she laughed. "I'm just trying to look good," she said, waving her hand. "I can't afford to go just because you're sick." Her words hit me harder than I could have imagined. The turning point came one evening when I accidentally overheard a conversation between Jessica and Lucas. She was in the kitchen, her voice quiet but animated. I was in the living room, flipping through the TV channels, when I caught snippets of their conversation. "You're too good to me," she said, her tone syrupy sweet. "I don't know what I would do without you." I leaned forward, trying to hear. Lucas's voice was muffled but unmistakable. "You deserve this, Jess. You're incredible." "Stop it," she said, laughing softly. But the way she said it playfully, almost flirtatiously, made me grit my teeth. I felt my chest tighten. Was I imagining things? Maybe their dynamic wasn't as innocent as it seemed. Later that night, I asked Jessica about the call. Who did you talk to? I spoke in a calm tone, even though my stomach was fluttering with anxiety. Just Lucas, she replied, not slowing down. He wanted to know about your next meeting. I nodded slowly, studying her face. If she was lying, she didn't show it. Jessica had always been able to stay calm. As much as I wanted to believe her, doubts began to creep in. And once that seed was planted, it started to grow. I didn't know it yet, but the walls of my world were about to come crashing down. Suspicion eats away at you step by step. It's a slow burn that nibbles away at the edges of your trust until there's nothing left. That's exactly what happened with Jessica. I didn't want to believe that she would betray me, not when I was fighting for my life, but the signs were there, clear as day. One night I decided to listen to my intuition. Jessica had gone on one of her quick visits to the hospital to drop off some papers that Lucas had supposedly asked for. She was dressed to the nines again, with red lipstick, a tight black dress that hugged her curves, and heels she hadn't worn since our last anniversary. Paperwork? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Hospital policy, she replied with a shrug, not meeting my eyes. Lucas called me earlier. He's swamped with work and asked me to help him. You know how hard he works. Hard at work, huh? My jaw clenched, but I forced a smile. Of course. Don't be long. As soon as she left, I grabbed my keys. I don't know what drove me to follow her that night. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe I was just tired of feeling stupid. I arrived at the hospital about 20 minutes later, parking in the far corner of the parking lot where I wouldn't be noticed. Jessica's car was already there, parked by the back entrance. I slipped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. The corridors were quiet, dimly lit, and as sterile as hospitals always are after hours. I didn't have a plan, I just knew I needed answers. It didn't take long to find them. Jessica and Lucas were in my office. My office. The door was ajar just enough for me to see in, and what I saw made my stomach flip. Jessica was sitting on the edge of my desk, her dress buttoned up at the hips. Lucas stood between her legs, his hands wrapped around her hips, and their lips locked in a kiss that left no room for doubt. I froze, every nerve in my body screaming for me to do something, anything. But for a moment, all I could do was watch, and the scene was burned into my mind like a brand. When I finally moved, it was barely audible. The doors slammed with such force that both of us were startled. Jessica let out a small gasp, pushing Lucas away as her eyes met mine. David! She exclaimed, her voice shrill and panicked. This is not what it looks like. Really? I said, my voice cold and sharp. Because it looks like you're fucking my doctor in my office. Lucas stepped back, his face pale. David, don't do that. I cut him off, pointing a finger at him. You don't have the right to say a word. Jessica started to speak, but I held up my hand. Stop it. I don't want to hear your excuses. For the first time in our marriage, Jessica looked truly speechless. Her gaze flicked from Lucas to me, as if she was trying to figure out how to turn this to her advantage. But there was no spin. Without another word, I turned and walked out, leaving them both standing there like jellyfish in a coffee grinder. As I drove home, my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The anger I felt was almost enough to drown out the pain, but not quite. The drive home that night was a blur. My mind replayed every memory, every sign I'd missed, every moment Jessica had looked me in the eye and lied. As I pulled into the driveway, my anger turned into a slow, simmering fire. The house was quiet. The children were sleeping upstairs, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. I sat in the living room and looked at the clock, waiting for Jessica to come home. It was almost midnight when the door finally creaked open. She came inside, hesitating when she saw me sitting in the dark. David, she began, her voice soft, as if she were talking to a child. Don't, I said, interrupting her. My tone was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. Don't even try. She sighed, closing the door behind her. Look, I know what you think you saw, but it wasn't. Stop lying, Jessica! I snapped, standing up so fast that my chair nearly tipped over. I saw you. I saw you with him. In my office, for God's sake! Her face contorted into something I'd never seen before, defiance. She crossed her arms and tilted her head, her blue eyes narrowed. All right then. You want to know the truth? Yes, I was dating Lucas. And you know what? I don't regret it. Her words hit me like a punch in the gut. I stared at her, trying to find the right words, but nothing came out. She took a step closer, her voice rising. Do you have any idea what it's like to be married to a man who is constantly sick? Always tired? Always dying? That's low even for you, I said, my voice trembling with controlled rage. Is it? She shot back. I'm supposed to just sit here and watch you disappear? Lucas made me feel alive again. He made me feel wanted. Her words were daggers, but I refused to let them see me bleed out. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I hope he was worth it, I finally said. Because I'm done, Jessica. This marriage is over. For a moment, she looked stunned, as if she hadn't expected me to fight back. But then she smiled, a cold, calculating expression that made my skin crawl. Fine, she said in a dismissive tone. But don't even think about taking my kids away from me. You can barely stand on your feet as it is. Her words struck a nerve, but I didn't wait for her reaction. We'll see about that, I said calmly. I took a pillow and a blanket from the couch, walking past her without looking back. You can sleep in the guest room, I muttered before going upstairs. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, it occurred to me that Jessica may have underestimated me. She saw me as weak, broken, and easy to manipulate. But she was wrong. I was fighting cancer, and now I was fighting her. For my own sake. For the sake of my children. For the life I had left to live. This was not the end of my story. Not at all. The next morning, Jessica acted as if nothing had happened. She walked around the kitchen, pouring the kids cereal and talking to them as if we weren't standing on the edge of a cliff. I sat at the table stirring my coffee, trying to focus on something other than the knot in my stomach. Good morning, she said with the fake cheerfulness she had mastered, barely looking at me. I did not answer. My silence hung in the air, and for a moment her smile froze. But then she recovered, turning her attention back to the children. When they went to school, I finally spoke up. We need to talk. Jessica sighed sharply, leaning against the counter. If this is about last night, David, I don't have the energy for another fight. Good, I said, standing up. Because this isn't a fight. This is a decision. Her eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? It means I've already called my lawyer, I said calmly, watching her reaction. Her face paled for a split second before she masked it with a smile. Come on, she said, crossing her arms. Do you really think you're in a position to go through a divorce right now? You barely have time to go to therapy. What makes you think you can handle this? Her words struck me, but I didn't show it. Instead, I met her gaze and my voice was steady. I can handle it. And I'll do everything I can to make sure our children aren't stuck in the middle of this mess you've created. Jessica's mask cracked, just for a moment. You can't play the victim here, David. You're not perfect either, you know that. No, I said, stepping closer. I'm not perfect. But I didn't destroy our family. This time she didn't come back quickly. I left her standing there and went to my office to call my lawyer again. This time I needed advice on how to protect myself and, more importantly, my children. As the days passed, Jessica's mask slipped more and more. She started staying late, barely hiding her relationship with Lucas. It was painful at first. But in the end, it only strengthened my resolve. I wasn't going to let her control me. I was tired of playing the role of a passive, sick husband. It was time to take matters into my own hands. It was amazing how many people rallied around me when the truth came out. My neighbor Mike, who I had always thought of as just a casual acquaintance, showed up with a six-pack and a pep talk that made me feel like maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. Then there was Sarah. She worked in the oncology department of the hospital, and we talked several times during my treatment. She was always kind. Her gentle humor was a bright spot in a dark time. When she heard about what happened, she started visiting me more often. Hi, she said one afternoon, poking her head into the waiting room. "How are you holding up?" I managed a small smile. "I've been better." Sarah sat down next to me, her expression warm and understanding. "If you ever need someone to talk to, or just to get your mind off things, let me know. Sometimes it helps to have a friend." Her words are etched in my memory. Jessica may have broken my heart, but she didn't break me. I wasn't ready to move on, but for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. It was only the beginning of the fight, and I was ready for it. If there's one thing I've learned in my fight against cancer, it's that battles are won one step at a time. I wasn't just fighting the disease, I was now facing a divorce, and Jessica wasn't going to make it easy for me. The first meeting with my lawyer, Mark Hayes, was a wake-up call. Mark was in his mid-50s, a serious man with a sharp mind and a reputation for ruthlessness in court. As I sat across from him, he leaned back, tapping a pen on his legal pad. "So," he said, "your wife is having an affair with your doctor. That's great." I couldn't help but laugh, despite myself. "That's one word to describe it." Mark nodded. "Here's the thing. We need to get ahead of this. Jessica is going to play dirty, especially if she thinks her reputation is on the line. Have you documented anything?" I hesitated. "I caught them, in the act. But I didn't write it down." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Witness testimony is important, but hard evidence is better. Start taking notes, texts, emails, anything that proves what she was doing." He paused, his tone softening. "I know it's not easy, especially with your health. But if you want to get custody of your children, you need to show the court that you are the one who is sane. Jessica's behavior may help your case, but it's not a guarantee." I nodded, taking it all in. The thought of having to dig through Jessica's lies, collecting evidence of her betrayal, almost made me want to vomit. But I would do it for my children. That night I began my own quiet investigation. I knew Jessica's habits, her daily routine, and more importantly her weaknesses. She wasn't as careful as she thought she was. Her phone was the jackpot. She rarely deleted her messages, and what I found was a treasure trove of damning texts between her and Lucas. Candid messages, plans to meet up, even talk of keeping their relationship a secret from their children. I took screenshots of everything, saving them in a folder on my laptop. Each message was like a fresh wound, but it also fueled my determination. Jessica was not going to come out of this unscathed. Meanwhile, Jessica didn't seem to notice my plans. She was still acting like she had the upper hand, going out with Lucas and coming home late with implausible excuses. One evening, when she walked in the door after another late meeting, I decided to talk to her. "How is Lucas?" I asked in a casual but sharp tone. She froze for a moment, and then forced a smile. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't insult my intelligence, Jessica. I've seen the messages. I know everything." Her smile disappeared, replaced by a flash of panic. "You went through my phone?" "Hell yes," I said, standing up. "And the court will see it too. Every single message." Her face was petrified, her protective mask snapped back into place. "You're pathetic," she hissed. "Spying on me like some jealous teenager. Good luck convincing a judge that you're a better father when you're wasting time in a hospital bed. We'll see who's pathetic when this is all over," I said in a calm voice. Jessica stormed upstairs, slamming the door behind her. I sat back down, my heart pounding, but my resolve was stronger than ever. It was no longer just about ending my marriage. It was about protecting my children and getting my life back. Jessica may have started this war, but I was determined to finish it. The days after my confrontation with Jessica were tense, a guitar string in the hands of the Red Hot Chili Peppers guitarist. Jessica kept up her facade in front of the kids, smiling at the breakfast table, helping with homework, pretending everything was fine. But when we were alone, the gloves came off. One day, while the kids were at school, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was surprised to see Lucas standing on the porch. He looked awkward, shifting on his feet like a kid being summoned to the principal's office. "Can I come in?" he asked in a low voice. Every instinct told me to slam the door in his face. But something about his expression made me stop. He didn't look smug or cocky like Jessica. He looked shy. Make it quick, I said, stepping aside. We sat in the living room, an awkward silence between us. Finally, Lucas cleared his throat. Listen, I know I'm probably the last person you want to see right now, he began. But I need to say something. I folded my arms, waiting. I screwed up, he said, his words coming out in a rush. I should never have contacted Jessica. It was wrong, and I regret it. I'm not here to make excuses. I wanted to apologize. I raised an eyebrow. You think an apology makes it right? You slept with my wife, Lucas. You helped tear my family apart. He winced, but he didn't argue. You're right. I deserved it. I deserve worse, honestly. But I'm ending this. With Jessica. I already told her it's over. It caught me off guard. Why now? He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. Because I see the kind of person she is. At first I thought she was different. Charismatic, fun, exciting. But now I see the lies, the manipulation. She's not who I thought she was. I leaned back, studying him. He hadn't been wrong about Jessica, but hearing it from him was strange. Like when your enemy hands you their weapon and walks away. And what am I supposed to do with this information? I finally asked. Lucas met my gaze. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. But if there's anything I can do to make this right or help you, just say the word. I didn't trust him. Not yet. But his offer planted a seed in my mind. Jessica felt like she had Lucas, her trusted ally, wrapped around her finger. If he was willing to turn against her, it could be a game changer. Want to help? I said after a long pause. Start by staying out of my family's life. And if you're serious about ending Jessica, do it now. Don't let her drag you back. Lucas nodded, his expression serious. You have my word. When he left, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't seeing the last of him. But I had bigger battles to fight right now. Jessica wouldn't take it lying down. If Lucas was truly out of sight, she would find another way to tighten her grip. But I wasn't backing down. Not this time. It didn't take Jessica long to realize that Lucas was gone. I realized it when she walked into the kitchen one morning and her usual smile changed to something sharper and more evil. Her eyes bore into me as if she were stalking prey. You think you're so smart, she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee. Her tone was light, but her words rang with venom. I didn't look up from my laptop. Good morning to you, too. She slammed the cup down on the table, coffee spilling over the rim. Don't play dumb, David. I know you talked to Lucas. What did you tell him? Did you beg him to leave me? I leaned back, folding my arms. I didn't have to beg. He realized what kind of person you are. Her face turned red, a mixture of anger and humiliation. For a moment, I thought she might throw the mug at me. Instead, she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. You think you've won? This is not over. You want a divorce? Fine. But you're not taking my children, and you're definitely not leaving here unscathed. I met her gaze, refusing to flinch. We'll see about that. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of court filings, meetings with mediators, and whispered conversations with my lawyer. Jessica wasted no time in portraying herself as the perfect mother, devoted and selfless, trying to make me look weak and incapable. She spins it like she's Joan of Arc, Mark told me during one of our meetings. But don't worry. The evidence we have on her will blow her sainthood to smithereens. The texts I had collected were incriminating, but Jessica did not go down without a fight. She argued that they were taken out of context, concocting elaborate stories about how Lucas relentlessly pursued her, and she tried to resist. She's good, Mark admitted after one particularly grueling hearing. But we're better. Despite all this, I realized that I was leaning more toward Sarah. At first, it was just casual conversations during treatments. She would check on me, make sure I was eating and resting enough. But over time, our conversations became deeper. One day, after a particularly difficult day in court, she sat with me in the hospital cafeteria. I don't know how you're holding up, she said, her voice soft but confident. I shrugged, picking at my sandwich. I don't have a choice, do I? My kids need me. I can't fall apart now. Sarah reached across the table, her hand touching mine. You're stronger than you think, David. And you're not alone. Remember that. Her words stuck in my mind like a small but constant light in the chaos. Meanwhile, Jessica did not give up. She started playing dirty, trying to turn the kids against me. At first, it was delicate remarks dash. Your dad is tired all the time, isn't he? Or, don't you wish he would play with you more? But they quickly escalated into aggression. One evening my daughter Emma came to me with tears in her eyes. Mommy says you don't love us anymore. She sobbed, clinging to my shirt. She says you're too busy being mad at her to care about us. My heart broke, but I held her close, stroking her hair. That's not true, sweetheart. I love you and your brother more than anything in the world. Don't ever forget that, okay? Jessica's cruelty knew no bounds, but I didn't let her turn my children against me. I started spending more time with them, taking them to the park, helping them with their homework, reading them bedtime stories. I needed them to see the truth, not the version of me that Jessica was trying to sell. And little by little, I saw that the situation started to change. Jessica was not used to losing, and each small victory on my part seemed to make her even more desperate. Her attempts to control the narrative became increasingly erratic. She began to show up late to court-ordered mediation sessions, claiming to be very busy, or citing traffic jams. But her excuses only made her look worse. One day, during a custody hearing, Mark leaned over and whispered, "Look." Jessica stood at the podium, confidently talking about being the primary caregiver, about how she had sacrificed everything for the family. She portrayed herself as the perfect mother and the victim of my alleged negligence. Then Mark stood up, holding a stack of printed texts. "Mrs. Henderson," he began, his voice calm but firm. "Can you explain these messages?" Jessica's confident facade cracked as Mark read aloud a series of texts between her and Lucas. Texts in which she explicitly referred to our children as a burden, and complained about having to pick them up from school because it interfered with her plans to see Lucas. The courtroom was silent as the judge scanned the documents. Jessica stammered as she tried to explain them, but the damage was done. When the hearing was over, I felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. For the first time, I felt like I had the upper hand. That night, after the children fell asleep, I sat on the porch with a cold beer and looked at the stars. I didn't realize how much I needed that little victory until it was in my hands. My phone rang and I saw a message from Sarah. "I heard about today. Congratulations, David. You deserve this victory." I smiled as I typed out a quick thank you. Her support was a lifeline in all of this. But the battle was far from over. Jessica wasn't going to go down without a fight, and I knew she was already planning her next move. Sure enough, the next morning she went on the attack. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" she sneered, blocking my path to the coffee machine. "Bringing my private messages to court? You're pathetic." I grabbed the cup as I walked past her. "You made this mess, Jessica. I just want to make sure the truth comes out." Her expression darkened. "You're going to regret this, David. I'll make sure of it." Her threat hung in the air as I walked away, but I wasn't afraid. For the first time, I felt like I had the strength to face what was coming next. It was no longer just a divorce, it was a war. And I was ready for the next battle. Jessica didn't waste any time escalating. A few days after her embarrassing courtroom defeat, I noticed her playing an unusual angle, charm. She began acting uncharacteristically sweet and cooperative, as though she thought she could manipulate me into backing off. At first, I ignored it, chalking it up to another one of her ploys. But when she started leaving little notes on the kitchen counter, saying things like, "We can still be a family," or, "Don't let anger ruin what we built," I realized she was pivoting strategies. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, Jessica approached me in the living room. She was dressed in one of her old favorite outfits, the kind she used to wear when she wanted something. "We need to talk," she said, her tone soft. "About what?" I asked, not bothering to hide my suspicion. She sat down beside me, a little too close. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "Maybe we're going about this all wrong. We don't have to destroy each other, David. We could work this out, for the kids. I raised an eyebrow. And by work this out, you mean what? Forget everything that's happened and go back to pretending we're happy? She sighed dramatically, placing a hand on my arm. I mean, we could be civil. You don't want to drag this into a nasty fight, do you? It's exhausting, for both of us. I leaned back, crossing my arms. What's your angle, Jessica? She blinked, feigning innocence. No angle. I just want what's best for the kids. Don't you? Her charm act was transparent, and I wasn't buying it. What I want is for them to grow up in a home that isn't built on lies. If that's what you want too, then great. Otherwise, save the theatrics. Her expression hardened, the sweet mask slipping. Fine, she snapped, standing up. Have it your way. But don't say I didn't try to make this easier for you. As she stormed out of the room, I couldn't help but feel like her act was just a prelude to something worse. The next day, my suspicions were confirmed. Mark called, his tone unusually grim. Jessica's filed a motion claiming you're an unfit parent, he said. She's alleging that your illness makes you incapable of caring for the kids and that the stress of the divorce is affecting your mental stability. I clenched my jaw, anger surging through me. She's desperate, Mark replied. And desperate people do reckless things. Don't worry, we'll fight this. But you need to be ready. She's going to throw everything she has at you. That evening, I sat with Sarah at the hospital after a particularly rough treatment session. She listened quietly as I vented about Jessica's latest stunt. She's trying to paint me as weak, I said, frustration evident in my voice. Like I can't take care of my own kids because I'm sick. Sarah placed a reassuring hand on mine. She's wrong. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met, David. And anyone who knows you can see that. I felt a spark of hope. Jessica's lawsuit to have me declared unfit to be a parent turned out to be stronger than I expected. On paper, her claims were weak. She exaggerated my health problems and told tales of my alleged inability to handle the stress of parenthood. But the thought that I might even temporarily lose my children lit a fire in me that I hadn't felt in years. Mark was not afraid. Let her spin her web, he said. We'll get her out of it. The court ordered a series of examinations, medical, psychological, and even home visits. I wasn't thrilled to have strangers interfering in my life, but I understood how important it was. I focused on proving that my illness did not define my ability to be a good parent. The first visit home was nerve-wracking. I cleaned the house as if my life depended on it, making sure the children's rooms were tidy, their schoolwork neatly folded, and their favorite toys were within reach. When the social worker came in, a kind but firm woman named Carol, I let her see the real me. I wasn't perfect, but I was present. We talked about my daily routine, how I balance treatment with parenting, and how I make sure that my children feel loved and supported no matter what. Your daughter mentioned that you read to them every night, Carol said, looking at the bookshelf filled with bedtime stories. I nodded. It's our little tradition. No matter how bad my day was, that time with them is non-negotiable. She smiled as she jotted something down in her notebook. It's obvious they mean a lot to you. As she left, I felt cautiously optimistic. Jessica, on the other hand, was confused. Lucas's departure seemed to hit her harder than she let on. She began to be late to pick up the children, looking exhausted and confused. One day she forgot to pack their lunches and Emma had to borrow food from a friend. Rumors of Jessica's difficulties began to reach the courtroom. Mark, who had always been a strategist, made sure to subtly emphasize these incidents, creating an image of a woman who was more focused on her own drama than on the well-being of her children. She can't handle the pressure, Mark told me after one hearing. You keep doing what you're doing, and the judge will see the truth. Meanwhile, Sarah became my support. She encouraged me during treatment, helped me prepare for evaluations, and even suggested creative ways to communicate with the children on difficult days. One evening, after a particularly grueling chemotherapy session, she surprised me by bringing me a board game that the kids loved. You've been their hero through all of this, she said as we set the game out on the dining room table. Let them be yours tonight. That night, as we laughed and played with Emma and Jake, I felt something change. The burden of fighting with Jessica became lighter, and for the first time in a long time, I felt calm and not anxious. But Jessica wasn't done yet. The next court hearing was coming up, and I knew she had one more trick up her sleeve. The day of the trial arrived, and I could feel the tension in the air as I entered the courtroom. Jessica was already there, her sharp heels clicking on the floor as she whispered something to her lawyer. She looked at me, her expression smug, as if she knew something I didn't. Mark leaned over as I took my seat. "Get ready. She's about to do something dramatic." I nodded, my jaw clenched. I'd spent weeks preparing for this, steeling myself for whatever she had planned. The trial began with routine statements, the judge asking questions, and the lawyers presenting evidence. Everything was going smoothly until Jessica's lawyer called her to the stand. Jessica's demeanor changed instantly, her voice trembling as she told a carefully crafted story about her struggles as a mother trying to protect her children from the chaos of our divorce. "And now," she said, dabbing at her dry eyes with a napkin, "I have reason to believe that David's involvement with someone new is causing even more instability for our children." I froze. This was not part of her usual script. Her lawyer showed me a photo fine-grained, taken from a distance of Sarah and me in the park with the kids. We were laughing, the children running around us. Jessica took a sharp breath, as if she was seeing it for the first time. "I was devastated when I found out," she said, her voice trembling. "He's flaunting his girlfriend in front of our kids like their feelings don't matter." Mark immediately stood up. "Objection. This has nothing to do with the custody case, and is a clear attempt to slander my client." The judge frowned, but allowed Jessica to continue. She took the opportunity to launch into a tirade about how my relationship with Sarah was inappropriate and harmful. I looked at Sarah, who was sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom. Her face was calm, but I could see the pain in her eyes. When it was my turn to speak, I remained calm even as Jessica's accusations hung in the air. "Yes," I said, addressing the judge. "Sarah has been a part of my life lately. She has been a source of support for me and my children during a very difficult time. But our relationship has always been respectful and appropriate. My main goal has always been, and will always be, the well-being of my children." Mark intervened, redirecting the conversation to the facts, the messages between Jessica and Lucas, her missed school meetings, and the social worker's testimony about my commitment as a parent. By the time the hearing was over, Jessica's dramatic stunt had lost its impact. Outside the courtroom, as I walked Sarah to her car, she turned to me, her eyes searching mine. "I'm sorry if I've made things difficult for you," she said quietly. "You haven't," I replied firmly. "Jessica is grasping at straws. She knows she's going to lose." Sarah smiled, but there was a hint of concern behind it. "I just don't want to be the reason you lose your kids." "You won't," I said, taking her hand. "You've been nothing but a blessing in my life, Sarah. Don't let Jessica make you doubt that." Her smile widened, and for a moment the chaos of the courtroom became a distant memory. As I watched her drive away, I realized that Jessica's antics were only strengthening my resolve. She could try to twist the truth, but the facts and my love for my children were on my side. The next round of this battle would be the hardest, but I was ready. This day has come. There was silence in the courtroom as we waited for the judge's decision. My heart pounded in my ears, every second stretched into eternity. Jessica sat across from me, her lawyer whispering in her ear as she stared straight ahead with a tense expression on her face. Mark gave me a reassuring nod, silently assuring me that we had done our best. Now all that was left was to listen. The judge cleared her throat, her gaze sweeping the room. "This was a difficult case, but my decision is based on the evidence presented and the best interests of the children." She fell silent, and for a moment I forgot to breathe. "The court awards primary custody to David's father." A wave of relief came over me so strong that I felt dizzy for a moment. Jessica let out an audible gasp, her lawyer leaning in to comfort her, as she muttered something to herself. "I didn't care." The judge continued by outlining visitation rights and emphasizing the importance of shared parenting. But her voice was background noise as I turned back to Mark, who was giving him a small, triumphant smile. "It's over," he said quietly. As I stepped outside, the brisk air hit my face, and for the first time in months I felt like I could finally breathe. Sarah waited by the steps of the courthouse, her face a mixture of hope and anxiety. When our eyes met, her face softened into a smile. "Well?" she asked in barely a whisper. I covered the distance between us with a few steps, putting my arms around her. "We did it," I mumbled. Her arms hugged me tighter, and for a moment the world disappeared. The next day brought a completely different expectation: the results of my health tests. I was sitting in the doctor's office, Sarah by my side, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. Dr. Patel entered with a folder in hand, his face neutral but not angry. He sat down across from us and opened the folder. "Well, David," he began, "I have good news. Your scans are clear. There are no signs of the cancer returning." The words did not come to mind at first. I blinked, looking at him as if he was speaking a foreign language. "It's gone?" I asked in a trembling voice. He nodded, a smile breaking through his professional demeanor. "You got over it." Sarah exhaled and squeezed my hand. Tears clouded my vision, but they weren't from sadness. That evening, as the children played in the yard and Sarah helped me set the table for dinner, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: the will to live. Jessica, bitter and alone, retreated in her anger, refusing to acknowledge her own part in the mess she had created. But I couldn't let her poison stay in my life any longer. I wished her well, for the children's sake, but I'm done looking back. As the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I looked over at Sarah, her laughter mingling with the laughter of the children running around the yard. My struggle has been long and exhausting, but it has brought me here, to a place of love, hope, and possibility. The future lay ahead, full of uncertainty but also promise. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to accept it, hand in hand with the woman who showed me how to live again.